A strained calm in South Sudan as fighting subsides. How the first special U.S. envoy for LGBT rights is engaging with the continent. And David Cameron may be out, but another famous number 10 resident is staying right where he is. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight in South Sudan, where a shaky truce between forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and those backing first Vice President Riek Machar appears to be holding. Now, Machar has withdrawn his troops on Wednesday to outside of Juba, but is not planning for war. That's according to his spokesman. The ceasefire that ended heavy fighting with the president's forces is now in its third day. The truce called by Kiir and Machar was welcomed by combat-weary residents and by foreign governments worried that Africa's newest country risks slipping back into full-blown civil war. The recent fighting left hundreds dead and displaced thousands of others. The trigger that sparked the start of the violence last Thursday reportedly came when Kiir's forces stopped and demanded to search vehicles with Machar's troops.
The gunshots were too much, so we got confused. People were running. Since that time, since that Saturday till now, the bullets and the shooting, even at night we see the gunfire, the bullets in the air moving in red color. So we are afraid, even we fear to go back.
Well, the U.S. State Department voiced caution, noting that there are still reports of sporadic gunfire in parts of Juba, despite the relative calm. John Kirby told reporters he does not foresee the evacuation of the U.S. ambassador, despite that what he described as the ordered departure of non-emergency personnel from the U.S. facility. Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai spent her 19th birthday Tuesday in the world's largest refugee camp, which the Kenyan government plans to close down by the end of the year. More than 300,000 mostly Somali refugees called the Dadaab camp in eastern Kenya home. Kenya alleges attacks in the country by al-Shabaab militants have been planned in the camp and calls the camp a security threat. Malala said Tuesday that no one should be forced to go back to Somalia, especially girls, whose only hope for an education has been the UN-run schools in Dadaab.
My biggest wish, which has been there for my whole life, is to see every girl getting quality education. And that's why I'm here to celebrate my 19th birthday with girls in Dadaab refugee camps, because as we all know that the camp is going to be closed down soon. So I want to make sure that these girls do not become a generation lost. And there is alternative facilities for them to continue their education. So I'm here to encourage them, empower them, and also speak up for them.
Malala said without schools, most adolescent girls in the refugee camp would end up married before their teens, meaning their lives would be over. Some refugees have already started returning to Somalia voluntarily. But Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta says no one will be forced to go back to Somalia. A Burundian member of the East African Legislative Assembly is dead after being shot on Wednesday. Hafsa Mosi, a former minister in President Pierre Nkurunziza's government, was killed in the capital Bujumbura. Mosi's death is the latest in a disturbing string of high-profile killings. Muthoni Wanyeki, Amnesty International's regional director for East Africa, says Mosi's murder must be thoroughly investigated and those reasonably suspected of responsibility held accountable in fair trials. More than 450 people have been killed since Nkurunziza pursued and won a third term last year. Amnesty International says Egyptian security agents have abducted and tortured at least several hundred people, some as young as 14, in an unprecedented spike in enforced disappearances aimed at silencing opponents. In a statement, Egypt's foreign ministry dismissed the Amnesty reports as biased, politically motivated, and aimed to harm its image. A judicial official says Egyptian prosecutors conduct random inspections of police compounds to ensure detainees were being held lawfully, and this was not reflected in the Amnesty report. President Barack Obama and his predecessor, George W. Bush, joined mourners in Dallas, Texas, Tuesday at the memorial service to honor the 5 slain police officers. The president praised members of law enforcement for the hard work they do to keep communities safe. But he also noted that prejudices exist and must be addressed. VOA's Laritza Hoke reports.
Obama has had enough practice for the Tuesday address in Dallas. He consoled mourners in Orlando, Florida last month, in Charleston, South Carolina last year, and a few others before that.
I have spoken at too many memorials during the course of this presidency.
He said society puts too much burden on the police and takes too little responsibility for its own actions.
We do have control over how we respond to the world. We do have control over how we treat one another.
Former President George W. Bush also tried to appeal to people's better side.
We know that the kind of just, humane country we want to build, that we have seen in our best dreams, is made possible when men and women in uniform stand guard.
Outside the Dallas Symphony Hall, where the memorial service was held, some people hailed Obama's visit.
I'm glad that we have a commander-in-chief who would take the time to come and console a city that has suffered a horrible tragedy.
But many said African Americans are victims of re-emerging racism.
I feel like there are things that's been going on for a long time. I've experienced it myself, my husband, and people that I know have. But I feel like we need to spread love and not hate. And there should be no reason for these cops to be killed.
We want to make sure that the president and elected officials take care of this situation and not be reactive but be proactive in this situation and change the laws and the policies that the community across the country is outraged about.
Some recall better times.
I'm 75 years old, and I remember a time when this was a close-knit country. Everyone was patriotic. I hope that we can get back to that. And I think if people can understand where each other are coming from, you know, maybe we can begin to heal.
But as one African-American man told VOA, healing may be hard to achieve.
Because of events and history and background and wrong things that have been done, things can blow up very quickly.
Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Democratic presidential contender Bernie Sanders finally endorsed Hillary Clinton Tuesday in what could be a major step toward unifying the Democratic Party in the run-up to the November election. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone has more from Washington.
After a long, hard-fought primary battle, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders officially ended his presidential campaign and formally endorsed the presumptive Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton.
She will be the Democratic nominee for president, and I intend to do everything I can to make certain she will be the next president of the United States.
The endorsement comes after weeks of negotiation and compromise between the two campaigns and sets the stage for a unified Democratic Party behind Clinton as she prepares to face Republican Donald Trump.
Being here with him in New Hampshire, I can't help but reflect how much more enjoyable this election is going to be now that we are on the same side. Because you know what? We are stronger together.
Trump took to Twitter to accuse Sanders of selling out to Clinton and disappointing his supporters. At his rallies, Trump continues to attack Clinton over her use of a private email server.
She's either a liar or grossly incompetent. One or the other. Very simple. Personally, it's probably both.
The Sanders endorsement should be an important step toward party unity, says John Fortier.
And I think if Bernie Sanders has a good role to play in the campaign, it really is as an attacker of Donald Trump or pointing out his weaknesses, not as much to be Hillary Clinton's great supporter, but to just show his supporters that Donald Trump is really not an acceptable alternative to Democrats.
A new poll shows Clinton struggling to win the support of young voters, many of whom preferred Sanders. and the Sanders endorsement could help, says Gallup pollster Frank Newport.
They'll try to get Hispanics registered to turn out. They'll try to get African American turnout to be what it was when Obama was running. As we talked about, they'll try to get young people to be activated and turn out and vote. But it's a challenge.
Besides Sanders, Clinton will also rely on help from President Barack Obama. So expect more joint campaign appearances like this one last week in North Carolina. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Nigeria's economy has struggled as crude oil prices plunged, but one industry is bucking the trend. For the details, Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino joins us live from New York. Hi, Jill.
Hey, Vincent. So it's no secret that the future of Africa has to shift from commodity dependency to a more tech-focused, consumer-based economy. One industry that has emerged as a big business is music in Nigeria, just like the famed Nollywood film industry, which is the third largest in the world behind Hollywood and India's Bollywood. The music industry's revenue from music sales was $56 million in 2015 and is forecast to grow to $88 million in 2019, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers. PwC also said that the country's entertainment and media industry had an estimated total revenue of $4.8 billion in 2015 and is likely to grow to some $8.1 billion in 2019, making it the fastest expanding major market globally.
So could music really become a significant source of revenue for Nigeria?
Well, proper regulation and bootlegging control is critical, as it is estimated that $1 billion is lost to piracy every year. Once the government understands that they can make money, they can generate revenue from this, and I think that will help to protect the industry. This was said by Asa, one of Nigeria's most internationally successful singer-songwriters. Value must be placed on intellectual property in Nigeria because not only does piracy affect sales of content, it also hurts other revenue streams like licenses and royalties. I follow a blog called AfricanMusicLaw.com, and she focuses on Nigerian copyright reform, and many of the provisions are starting to mirror those of the U.S. bill, which indicates that some progress is being made.
So the internet and social media explosion has certainly contributed to growth in Nigerian entertainment industry, right?
Oh, yeah. Without question, artists are gaining exposure through digital channels. A new study shows that the smartphone penetration rate in Nigeria hit 30%. Inexpensive smartphones are opening new opportunities for marketing and commerce in emerging markets like Nigeria. Nigerian artists are exploding on the global collaboration scene, teaming up with top U.S. artists. So put on your dancing shoes, Vincent, because this is just the beginning of a major trend in international entertainment.
We're watching. Jill, as always, thank you very much. At Africa 54, business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting live from New York. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. Check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, the first ever U.S. Special Envoy for LGBT issues discusses the push for global human rights. Stay with us.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
I'm Stacy Kozel. I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail.
And that's a long hike, stretching 3,500 kilometers from the U.S. state of Maine to Georgia. Many have done it, but Stacy has lupus, and her legs are paralyzed. She's using the computer-controlled C-brace made by Ottobock to move her legs.
When I throw my hips forward, it'll go on the toe part, which tells the computer that I need my knee to bend, so I have a natural walk.
With the brace, Stacy is conquering a hike that will take many months. She wants to be an example that helps others.
If I can do this, get out of my wheelchair and hike up and down mountains, then, they should try to look into helping other people, hopefully.
Stacy Kozel says she hopes to make the potential of the C-brace more widely known to doctors and insurance companies. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
President Barack Obama has overseen a number of firsts for lesbian, gay, and transgender people in the United States, including gay marriage. He's also appointed the first ever special envoy to represent the rights of the LGBT community around the world. In this week's One-on-One with Peter Clotty, Peter speaks with Randy Berry about his unique role and his message to Africans.
What would you say is the significance of the third adoption of the UN of the respect of human rights of the LGBTI community, particularly in Africa? What impact will they have there?
First, I think that it's deeply meaningful. I think by any objective measure, this is the most substantial action that the UN system has taken to systematize a focus on LGBTI persons and their human rights in its history. I think you can't really overstate that. So I think what that will do is bring greater resource, greater expertise to bear in a consultative capacity for those countries that seek it.
Why do you think there has been somewhat of a not significant progress on the respect of human rights of the LGBTI community in Africa?
I think that people generally have a lack of knowledge where the realities of this community are involved. There is a tendency, I believe, to think that this is a chosen behavior rather than, as we know, this being a feature of how a person is born. Just the same way a person is born with a particular race or ethnicity and a particular gender. The conversation really is about how we, as responsible progressive societies, make sure that equality and dignity under the law really means something, whether that's in the U.S. or whether that's in South Africa or whether that's in Ghana or any other country.
Well, you've been to Africa, so you know the landscape pretty well. Recently, there were charges by some African leaders that the U.S., and for that matter, some Western countries are forcing them to address issues of the LGBTI community. How do you address some of these charges?
You know, I've had the chance, as I've traveled, to meet with a number of African leaders, including some who have changed, you know, whether that's in political leadership, in traditional leadership, in business, who have changed their views on this. And I always ask the question, what changed your mind? And as is the case with so many of my, of my fellow Americans, what changes a person's mind is when they understand and they know somebody who's affected by it. It adds a human element that then people can say, well, wait a minute, discrimination really isn't justified because this is someone I know. Certainly criminalization isn't justified because this is someone that I know. Should they be arrested simply due to their identity?
Mm-hmm. You are aware some African countries have promulgated laws, others are considering in their parliaments or legislature bills that criminalizes the LGBT community. How do you engage with some of these countries to tone down on some of their opposition to the respect of the rights of the LGBTI community in Africa?
We do that by having a very thorough conversation about what the implications of those laws can be. Many countries, whether it's in Africa or elsewhere, are made up of diverse populations, whether you mark that by tribal lines, whether you mark that by religious background or ethnic lines, that once you begin to single out a part of your community and say these people are different and they need to be punished based on an issue of identity, that's a very slippery slope. But we also engage in a different kind of conversation in many places, many of them in Africa, where you have this legacy of criminalization that was simply left over from colonial days, but then is somehow embraced as part of the culture, which I think there's a rich irony there, And in fact, these laws were imported into Africa. They were not part of the African cultural dialogue before this. So, we are encouraging states to look at them because many African states have never arrested on the basis of these. They've never prosecuted. They've never jailed people on this basis. But their mere existence can be a significant problem because what it allows people to do.
What would be your message to the African leaders who have been opposed to the respect of the LGBTI community's human rights in these countries, who sometimes face oppression and sometimes criminalization, brutality, violence, and all that?
Again, I think once a leader can meet people in their own community, their own society, who are directly impacted by this, that greatly deepens the ability to engage and to understand. Really, what we're talking about at its root is not an issue of LGBTI community inclusion. It's an issue of equality, and whether or not the parts of our Constitution or legal arrangements that guarantee equality of citizenship are real or not. And that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Despite political upheaval in the UK, one Downing Street resident survives the handover of power. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. It's a trip back in time to the 70s and 80s when the Czech Republic and Slovakia was still Czechoslovakia and part of the Soviet bloc. The wood paneling, analog black and white TVs and floral carpets are all part of a new immersive exhibition in Prague that is celebrating all things home interior and fashion from the communist era. The home interiors exhibits reflect a time of limited consumer choice. Many people say the curators will have had the same set of furniture and even the same kitchen utensils. And some homes would have had one of these. The Dissident's Bedroom exhibit shows a sparse living area with only a mattress on the floor, a typewriter, and a few black market records. Well, next up, the intricate craft of making a costume by hand, a dying art in Hollywood, as computer-generated imagery dominates the blockbusters. But here, at the Global Effect in North Hollywood, California, workers still hand-make costumes and props. The 11,000 square foot facility provides everything from body armor to spacesuits for movies, TV, museums, and the aerospace industry. Old-world techniques such as metalwork, sculpting, welding, and sewing are all as important here as they ever were, even though 3D printing now allows for costumes and props to be created right on set. The head of the company says he has such a hard time finding young people with the skills he requires that he's now considering opening a school to teach the craftsmanship. Well, and finally, despite all the political churn in the UK, one resident of number 10 is staying put. Chief Mauser, Larry, the cat, is to keep his job and home in Downing Street after it was confirmed he would be spared eviction when British Prime Minister David Cameron leaves on Wednesday. Larry has become a familiar presence outside the Prime Minister's residence since he moved in 2011. According to a government spokesman, Larry belongs to a civil servant and not the Cameron family and will therefore be staying put. And that is what is trending today. Well, a young African fashion designer is putting a modern twist on men's clothing styles from the 1960s. Reporter Maurice Mogorane visited with the design studio in Rwanda and in this story narrated by Salim Solomon.
26-year-old Matthew Rugamba got his start in fashion trying to modernize the traditional kitenge, loincloth common across East Africa. At his house of Tayo in Kigali, the Rwanda designer has expanded into African outfits and accessories with a contemporary twist. Rugamba says he is inspired by the looks of the 1960s and the era of African independence, especially the styles of former Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba and the U.S. civil rights activist Malcolm X.
If you look at the 1960s, that time when the independence movements were picking up, that was the perfect blend of West and African style, because you'd see Patrice Lumumba wear, like the bow ties and suits, but you'd see him wear like a leopard skin or some sort of print, and that sort of aesthetic really caught my eye, and I use that as the foundation for this brand.
As Rugamba's designs find bigger audiences abroad, he is determined to keep manufacturing local, producing all of his accessories through a Kigali-based women's cooperative where seamstresses say they have a voice in design.
When he first proposed the designs to us, we had trouble adapting, and then we got used to it. He shares his ideas with us and accepts our ideas. Eventually, it became good.
The unique designs that House of Tayo brings will now go hand in hand with the enthusiasm people have for these new products, beginning with the loincloths. Recently, fewer people are buying imported second-hand products.
Most of Rugamba's high-end designs are too expensive for much of the local market. As he looks to expand from East Africa to North America, he says his number one goal is to make House of Tayo products more affordable for everyone. Salim Solomon for Maurice Mogorane, VOA News.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now, be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That is Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words. This word is one that you might hear in stories about crime.
In what officials describe as a bold and courageous operation, U.S. forces quietly moved into an area near still dangerous Benghazi Sunday, capturing Ahmed Abu Khattala, the suspected ringleader of the 2012 attack that left 4 Americans dead.
Ringleader is 2 words put together. Ring and leader. It means the person in charge of a group of people. Usually, they are involved in something illegal.
Our story was about the capture of the suspected ringleader of the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya. Now, when you hear the word ringleader,
your American English will be good enough to know what this news word means.